What I found though was sometimes you get some awkward looking pieces. And so I was talking to another friend of mine about design, and we were like, so how can we apply some of the concepts of design into this process? Because this is one that I did where it's the folly of a lot of wood turners. I tried to get the most out of a piece of wood, just turn away just as little as I could so I could get the most bowl, the most base, the most whatever out of that piece of wood. And I don't feel like it's as elegant a form as something like this, or pieces that get even longer, similar to these, or these, right? So I started looking at the golden rectangle as inspiration, and that really just doesn't fall into this. And then talking with this friend of mine about design, he was like, how about that guy with his number strength? Anybody remember who he is? Yeah, good. Fibonacci. That's who we're looking for. And he came up with this thing where you can get this series of numbers where you've got 0, and then you add 1, and then you add those, and then you add the next number to the previous number. And it creates this mathematical sequence where you can then derive numbers that are just nice. They go together well. I don't articulate that very well. But what I found was by the time you start getting too much bigger, you go way beyond what your lathe has a capacity to turn. But that can really apply to anything. That doesn't have to be inches. That could be centimeters, that could be millimeters, that could be, so you can work with different scales, but maintain a similar sequence. And if you pick numbers from those lists, you end up with more pleasing shapes than you do without it. And this shape here, because of its depth and its width, it is about this much too short on either end to really hit that sort of pleasing mark. So what I've got up here, I looked at my wood, I measured its thickness, I measured the width that I could get out of it, and I came up with a sequence of 2.5, 4 1/4, and then I just started adding those together. And that worked out great to a set of numbers that would fit onto this lathe. I've got a 24 at home, so go a little bigger, which is advantageous for those long, skinny ones. And I was like, cool, I'll do that. I'm using that and that and that in this piece here. And then I glued it up. I'll talk about the glue up here in a little bit, but I glued that up. And then I realized that I made an error in what was going on, because these two numbers need to be half of one another in the way I do these pieces. And they are not half of one another. So what I needed to do is I needed to put a spacer in here. Again, I'll get to that here in a minute. So by the time this gets round, what I'm going to end up with is half of that number, because that was my widest dimension. So by re-adding those numbers, I can alter my size kind of in the finished dimensions and get there with kind of a pleasing end to it. So it doesn't have to be nice round numbers. And again, you can use any kind of scale you want to make this happen. I found that using any of it, so even if we did 2.5, 4 1/4, and we did something short like 11, it's a more pleasing shape. And a bowl like this one, you would have had numbers something along the lines of 2.5, 4 1/4, and it would have been like 15, where it just kind of fell in between, where it just didn't quite work within the sequence. And it looks fine, but it's not one of those ones that just grabs you and draws you to. So the reason you gotta have half of one another is because I end up taking this block here and we split it in half long. So we're gonna come and we're gonna turn this and we're gonna turn a cigar shape to it. I should have brought that other piece. Well, here. Look at that. Here we are, half of another piece, right? So we end up turning a cigar kind of shape to it, and then we split it in half. And then we work from this form on to the finished bowl. And that is kind of beneficial because then you get twice the product out of, you know, the start of each piece. And if you really like the shape, you either have two of them or you got one to screw up and you can then move on to the next one and learn what you did wrong, right? So we're going to talk about all I do with this and figuring out nice symmetry kind of shapes, because as you turn these shapes, as you change the diameters on the small ends, it starts to affect the finished product and the curvatures that you can achieve from those finished products. So we'll work through that here tonight as we go along. Let's get that going. The secret is masking tape and hot glue.
Do you
And a
use
lot of hot glue.
the craft paper method to glue those together?
I do. Because it works really, really well. And I've actually found, rather than craft paper, the slick paper that comes in the circulars, that real slick paper that's the color stuff, that actually splits easier than craft paper does.
Is there a color behind?
I think it has to do with the slickness and then the kind of pulp in between, just somehow it just splits easier. It's not as much effort to bang it apart. That's all I know.
It's called an enamel thing.
Okay. But it splits on the paper, you know, it doesn't separate on the enamel size.
The Woodcraft newsletter, is that the paper?
Yeah. Thinking about that big. Actually, what I end up using, I replace my furnace filter about once a month. And that's got like the decorative by me flashy paper that surrounds it, and that ends up being long enough to do most of my pieces. So, but you know, wherever you get it, doesn't matter where. Like the trailer hitch, man. Go get you every time. So I knocked the corners off of this just to make it a little faster here tonight. But I took this sequence of 2, 4.5, and then I was like, okay, I'm going to do 17 3/4 with it. And I've actually found if you want to end up at 17 3/4 in length, you need a little longer, because as you start turning these edges down, often you end up cutting off some in order to get a nice fluid. And then if you don't have it perfectly centered, if you get a point on one, sometimes you get a flat spot on another. So you got to turn a little more just to get rid of it all. And you end up getting to be shorter than your original intention. And just to not come up short, you can always turn it away, right? So I think I went to about 18.5 on this. In order to make this the half of the 4 1/4, I would have need to have glued a shim of wood in between. What is that, a 1/2 inch shim? Something like that. Yeah, a 1/4 inch shim. I'm shy of a 1/4 inch. So if I had put like a piece of 1/4 inch ply in between, I could have maintained this first set of numbers. But I glued it up, and then I was looking at the numbers and I went, because I've done that on other pieces. These big long ones, I had about I guess it's about 1.5 inch shim in between the 2 layers, where I then, after splitting it apart, the shim in between just disappeared. And I actually only shimmed the end a couple, like 6 inches, rather than the entire thing, because that would have been a nightmare to split in half. Yes, sir.
That sure looks like a kayak to me.
I think they were dubbed
That's
the
basic
kayak
design they
bowls.
start with, do you think?
I'm sorry again?
Do you think that's the basic design they start with?
I have no idea.
You should go measure one.
Maybe so. Not the sea kayaks, they're a little stubby. Those sea
Yeah,
kayaks,
I'm talking about
those
her.
would be these, right? Yeah, I don't know, could be. Maybe they used Fibonacci to design those. So some of this too, all the different colors, burning and then sandblasting or sandblasting and dye, just fooling around with different textures and color options and things like that. Then on that journey, Tom Crab, how many of y'all remember Tom Crab? He's just like, because he was Mr. Multi-Axis, right? He's like, I need to do even more axes than you're doing. So I ended up doing 6 axes on this so that I could get that all out of one piece. And then that's about an 1/8 inch thick, hollowed out in the ball. And then people are like, well, what do you do with it? Well, you play it. Right? So just trying to help you think outside the box. More access, more complication. Danny Luttrell then came to me and was like, hey, can you start doing propellers where you got to turn them on a few different axes within these? And Barbara Dill's got a lot of stuff like that going on too with all her crazy, what does she call those? She's got a whole book on it now.
Yeah.
Right, so she's figured out all the math and everything on all that stuff, and she was like taking off with that, and I'm like, I'm staying here. And then I got this, so. Something I've done is glued this together. I've also then taken a chisel and I've actually chiseled marks in the center lines. I guess I did it only on one side at this point. So as I turn this, I'm gonna at some point need to start measuring to get the symmetry between the two sides. Because if these sides aren't symmetrical, you've got one end that's really fat. You gotta think through this whole process of how is this gonna look and present. And I haven't done it, but I was thinking, what if I did sort of a avocado shaped one where I left it really fat on one end or another and put the bowl kind of literally turn an avocado, and you could do that kind of thing too. You just want to plan it out, right? You just got to make sure that it's balanced weight wise off center, and that's all you got to do for things like this, all one piece of wood. But you've got a center here, you got a center here, and you got a center here when you start spinning them on their faces. So you just have to have enough swing on your lathe. So we're going off the end here tonight. Just to give them, it's easier to get at it if they're off the end. All right, I guess we'll turn on the lathe or something at this point. Questions so far? I'm glad you asked as we go. I think that you can.
So you just pick any 3 numbers on that sequence. You can pick any 3 numbers.
Yes. Yes, and I have also found the larger the gap, like between 89 and 144, you could be at 140. And you'd be okay.
Yeah.
The larger the gap, the more kind of play you have. You certainly don't want to just pick something right in the center between the two, because you're going to end up with one of those awkward kind of shapes. So what I start with is trying to get myself a nice cylinder. That way it's easier to measure stuff out. We'll see how well I do with this tonight. And we're going to use my favorite tool. And what I turn actually most of this with is the largest spindle roughing gouge. Is that what they call them now? I think spindle roughing gouge. The bigger a format tool, you can do the same work, the easier your time you're going to have getting that work done. So if you're doing smaller bowls, if you can do it with a 1/2 inch bowl gouge and reach what you need to reach, it's going to be easier. You got more mass, you got the ability to cut more wood. It just things get faster, easier, and you then have less chance of things being lumpy and bumpy because you're using a broader format to achieve the same shape. Same thing holds true for wood carving if you care. Get rid of those. Get rid of that. Rest down, baby. Trying to follow all the proper protocol of turning off the lathe when you go to move the tool rest, all those good things. So,
What kind of wood are we using?
This is ash. What you don't see me doing, or what you see me doing, but you don't know what I'm doing. I'm comparing the straightness of this to the edge of the slot there between the two beds, just to see if I'm pretty parallel. And we are close enough to round at this point because we are then gonna change the shape on this. So we gotta measure some stuff out. I've got my center line here where the chisel mark is. We'll go ahead and set them down. Put that in here. I think from there, we're gonna work on just shaping something out that looks nice on one side and we'll match it to the other. I like to use ash when I'm looking at doing the texturing. So oak and ash would work fine when I do the sandblasting or the burning, because it helps to enhance the texture where I can then put the colored waxes in it easier. That's something that the all rectangular piece there and the two black pieces. I was doing the liming wax on the black and I just found that there wasn't enough texture. So I found that burning or sandblasting helped to enhance the texture so that it ended up just making it easier to wax it and still looking good. I don't remember. Yeah, that's cool.
I have a question
Yes, sir.
from online. Where do you get the stock for larger pieces?
This is all kiln dried lumber, so I work here, I buy it here. Actually, you know what? I bet most of this ash I'm using, I ended up buying wholesale at one point when I bought like 1,000 board feet of ash. But that's back when ash was cheap. Ash isn't cheap anymore. So oak would be a fine substitute to it, but when I go to the natural color versus the dyes, I just prefer the color of ash as part of the natural finish. So I still lean that way in general. All right, let's get Papa shape in here. That looks good. Nice gentle taper, wide format tool. Saw that hand first.
As I'm looking at it from very close up, that almost looks like it's straight paper, not a round tool, or if there is,
It's a subtle round.
very little. Okay. Because I'm looking at this piece on the table here, that looks like that's almost straight. I did.
they've got a very subtle arc to them. And so some of the things that you have to decide. As you're cutting this arc, you got to understand that from the halfway point back down this direction, you're going to have some sort of other arc going with it. And if you're trying to make them uniform, you got to plan ahead. If you're doing a fold that has a bead on it, like this one, you got to plan ahead for the height of this bead. From this side, from the height of the bead so your start point would then be here down this arc to a center point. If you really want to make it symmetrical, but asymmetrical is cool. So the more you turn towards the center point of your cigar shape here, the flatter this is going to be. The less arc you put here, the more arc you're going to have in the bowl. Like that one. It's a little more turned down than something like this that's a little closer to symmetrical. Now, if you really want to go symmetrical, you got to really plan, and then you got to not mess up the bead. If you take too much wood off there, it starts lowering things down. So there, you can put a whole lot of thought process into it. If you do a lipless bowl, or no bead on it there like that, you got choices going too. This one's pretty close to centered. And again, some of it's the length, but I also kind of don't like the center deal. So if you really wanted to plan out from the center point, you could measure a bunch of those things. Sure. You just got to plan it out. I got a little bit of a dip right here, but this is also just a demo. We're going to work through this to get to the exciting part. So we're going to sort of match this up. Now that I see it, I got to correct it. But after I started turning and got the rough shape done here, because this is not a straight arc, I end up starting to use flatter portions of that tool as I'm turning so that I can get a flatter, more easy, kind of gentle curve as we're going. You got to utilize that whole tool. Obnoxious sound that is. Sharp tools.
Just add color.
Yeah, it's like the red violin, right? But I'm a dad. I have bandits in my pockets.
You work out of your house or you have a shop?
Yes, I have a shop detached from my house, but it's one of those long commutes where I walk about 50 feet, maybe 50 yards. I don't know. Good with distances, I think. Not very far. Yeah. There. Now we won't color the wood. Carry on. Right? So if I was at home and I thought this was going to end up being truly a finished piece, I would refine this a little more. And once the whole shape is done, you got to sand that, because once you're done and you split it, there is no sanding that shape on the lathe anymore. So from our center point here, and I don't mind using a chisel here because I'm planning to put the bead on the bowl, and any chisel marks are gonna end up getting cut away when I cut away the bead. So we will just take our chisel and mark the other side, because we need to be able to find center on the flat of that piece without any kind of issue. So we'll just put something that won't disappear like a pencil line in place. And then we're gonna measure. Why I have this. Depending on the size of your piece, you might find that 1 inch, or your skills, 1 inch, 2 inch, whatever seems to be how easy it is for you to connect the dots as you then set diameters and turn to them. I'm doing 2 inch increments here on this. It's magnetic, that's good. Nice. It's not.
Did you ever try to do it totally by eye and see how good you could get?
Nope. So then it's just matching diameters, right? Get out your dial calipers. Guess they're not dial. Get out your calipers. But I'm setting the calipers larger. I will set diameters, and then I'll get roughed to the diameters that the caliper sets, and then I will recut working on symmetry. That lends me a faster finished product. I found. What's proper etiquette now? Are we allowed to do this while it's running, or should we not do that while it's running?
Go for it.
Go for it.
Okay.
Yeah, it's gonna hit me. It's gotta ricochet off me first, right?
You have more mandates.
Yeah. That sentence is not high. Now my calipers aren't going so deep. By eye, right? That was pretty good. All right, come on, Braden. Now. Did my calibrated eye fail me? We'll see. What? You know what we're gonna do? We're gonna turn this side. Then we're gonna make that It's all right. work in progress.
Yeah.
Okay. And we have like 45 minutes left.
Yes.
Yeah. Just wondering, how much do y'all want to watch me mess with this? Move on?
We're good.
Okay. Take your time, plot it out, plan it. Okay. Want to give you all what you want to see. All right. So then, after you get your final shape done, and you come in and you take your chisel from both ends and you split it in half. Here's the end cut from that piece that was there. I can find my paper seam, and it doesn't hardly take any work at all then if you get a chisel put on that center line. And so on the longer pieces, and then you can see the paper there in between. On the longer pieces, I chisel until it fractures, and then I go to the other end and chisel a little. And even if you mar up this end, what I try not to do is chisel right exactly in the center where I've got that, because where the live center and the drive spur points were is the center of your work. You want to be able to reference that for the center line that goes down the face. So you want to chisel off center from it. And if you chip that up, it doesn't matter. You're turning that away when you turn that face. Same thing about putting that chisel mark on the edge there. Unless you're doing a piece like this, you are probably going to turn away your chisel mark that marks the center line for that.
By offsetting it, are you sacrificing one part of it to gain the other?
That paper, did you see how easy the paper split?
Yeah,
Yeah, it just,
but it was on a little piece, it wasn't.
well, now when you chisel it, it's gonna split and you could probably pry it by hand if you really wanted. I just found on the piece that I have on the faceplate already ready to go. It was just easier to turn it over and let the mallet do the work than it was to, you know,
This piece you have in there right now is the same thing, you glued two halves together.
that is correct.
With one sheet of paper between.
That is correct. Yeah, newspaper will work. You know, and pass that around too, if y'all wanna see, you'll see the seam there, that kind of thing.
Yellow glue,
Yep. Oh,
Not wood.
not what. Probably would.
all right. So then it takes a little work to get everything centered up. Of course, it's sugar. No. Everybody recognize my plumb bob? I'm gonna pass around a photo of what I've done. So on my workbench, I'll take 2 clamps. I'll take a 3rd clamp across the top just to create a structure that I can hang a plumb bob from. And I will then take my faceplate and mark the center of the faceplate. And then I will use the plumb bob to make sure that it is centered on the faceplate. Then I will take the turning and make sure that the center is of the turning there, the split cigar shape, the center of that is on the center of the faceplate. Otherwise, you will have bowls way off center. It's really easy to be just a little bit off center at that. So once you've got that whole structure set up, deep. Yeah.
I'm curious, if you refine this idea you're working on, do you find yourself staying with pretty much standard tools, when you grind the tools, or have you made some of your own tools?
Standard tools. That's a great question. All right. So I glue blocks to support this to make sure it adheres to the faceplate. And
Glue, though.
that is hot glue. And everybody knows that when you buy hot glue, you gotta go to like Joann's or Michael's and get those 50% off one-time purchase coupons. And then go back the next day with your next 50% off and you poured your hot glue. Just masking tape. It's all about surface area. So I'm gonna get this one kind of prepped up here, show you the hot glue method. But I have the faceplate already set up so that we can get to turning faster. That way we don't have to wait for the hot glue to cool. So we'll just put the tape on where it's probably going to be touching the block. Make sure that it's smooth everywhere. Rub it in. I've taken just scrap pieces of, this happens to be oak, ash, pine, whatever. And I look at the diameter and I try to cut about the same shape that the large diameter is out of it. And then the hot glue fills in everything else. So I'm going to double check here that that is going to be touching nothing but tape. Looks like it. Oh, so if you want to do this all on the lathe, and I've done a few like this, it's just a lot of extra work if you have a planer on hand. It's a lot of extra work if you don't have a planer. You do have a planer. Anyway, first thing that I do is I want a flat spot on the back of those bowls so that they'll sit flat on the table. So what I did is on the first few I did, I drilled a hole in the center, put it on a screw chuck, spun it, turned a flat spot on. And that's a lot of effort to get a tiny little flat spot. After a few of those, I said, and I'll take this and I'll shove it in a planer and I'll get myself a little flat spot. It's just so much easier to do. You know,
Drum sander might even be easier.
slower, but yeah, you know, it'll work. You know, the advantage of that is it's got the belt that pulls it. So sometimes those first couple passes, you know, and you get little, like, depending on your planer, you might get little teeth marks from the rollers or something, but that's all fixable. It's wood, it's fixable. Who knows? Nobody knows but you, right? So once you have a flat spot to reference it to, you need to hold it on. So when you push this in, it doesn't push out of flat to it. But once you have your block ready, just load that block up with hot glue. And again, lots of hot glue. You know, the more hot glue you have, that's gonna fill in those spaces that are in between.
It also keeps it hot a lot longer if there's a lot to it.
Yeah,
Get your shape there with a router.
oh, just a bandsaw. It's just gotta be a rough shape. So I'm holding that down flat. I'll press that in. Try to get it about centered on the center line, the weight of the block. You don't want too much weight one side or another. Sometimes you have a robust lathe and you're like, phooey, it'll handle it, but life's easier if it's more balanced. So just take the time. That's dry enough to pick it up and show you. So that's just glued on there. And these I just knock off with the mallet when everything's said and done at the end. You pick off the tape, sand off whatever little sticky residue is left. Not a big deal. Most of the time, this size and smaller, that's what I put on blockwise. I don't bother supporting any more than that. I find it's just fine. So once you then have your faceplate under your plumb bob jig centered, you can put that in place onto the faceplate. And then I go in and I hot glue around the perimeter, the three sides of those blocks sticking out the side. Because we're in a turning demo and, you know, Murphy, I went ahead and put extra blocks of support and attachment out here on the ends, just for safety reasons. Again, at home, most of them kind of that size or smaller. It's just these center blocks. You're being real gentle when you're turning these on the faces. So as long as you can control yourself to be gentle, that's all the more you really need. But, you know, if you're feeling like you want to, go ahead and do that. So this is all nice and centered up, ready to go. I got the center mark drawn out there. And what I did with that, from the little points that the spurs made, I drew the center line down the length. From the chisel marks that I had put on the center lines there, I went ahead and just made crosshairs so that you can find that plumb bob spot easy. A lot of steps, not complicated. That's why I want to bench it this in.
You're doing 3 recesses. You done it 3 different times, or have a bigger face plate, how would you do?
Like that one with the 3.
Yeah.
know where my blue went. Hopefully you can see the red. Yeah, I want to draw that. So. This is the bottom half. Bottom half. And in order to get this shape, this continuous curve, just like if you were going to turn feet or handles, you would turn raised rings where you want your bowls to go. So if it was like a whole diameter, you'd have these raised rings. If it's not, you just have raised lumps. And I work on getting that continuous space first, and then I would mount it 3 separate times, put balance blocks on those, and then turn that away and do whatever little subtle feathering and sanding, just like if you were doing handles or feet or things like that. So what we found out tonight is this handle goes down. Now it's attached. Nobody wants to set screw to the base. Unpleasant,
Why'd you move the headstock?
so I can reach this easy. Pain in the neck to try and reach over a bed, isn't it? I'm turning all right here.
And it's safer too.
Close. But the cool thing about this, really easy to see when your tool rest is in the right place, because you can just, you're like, where is it? Just turn it, there it is. You know, you're clear. What are we doing first? Lay that hole in first. Because why not? Pencil, face shield. Not quite centered. It's all right. I often find it's just easier to partition stuff off. I don't get too close because I find quality of cut from the parting tool leaves a lot to be desired in this situation. I want to get rid of this wood over here, just so that it's easier to roll that bead on that bowl. Keep your tool handles low. You gotta have a low approach, right?
Too close.
I'm digging that. Sorry. On my lathe at home, I have the lower off the back side of my lathe. And with the tool post, I generally don't ever run into that as a problem. It's what you're used to, right? There you go. So as you're cutting out here on the end of these propellers, you just gotta be real gentle with your cuts. Enabling me to look at the ghost shadow there off that hole. Volgav. That be. Gotta resist the urge if you're used to touching your edges to slow it down. Everybody see the swing of that handle? Right, David? Swing the handle. Can't tell you how many times I heard that coming from the other classroom where I was teaching. Swing the handle! It's a fat looking bee, but we're going with it. It's bold. Any questions so far?
Is that ash also?
No,
Here,
it is cherry. How fast that beat is. You know, I'll get the point. Oh, I've mostly turned off. It did. Cool.
And when you turn multiple bowls on one of these, you set it so that the face you're turning is gonna be parallel, so it gets a little trickier on redoing it.
It does, just different blocks to
Yeah.
glue it all up. But yeah, so as that face curves.
Yeah.
If you want the bowl to have an even lip, you've got to pitch the entire piece.
Yeah.
Parallel to the faceplate in the area that you're turning that other bowl. Did that explain that a little bit?
Yeah, no, you got it.
Yeah.
It sounds a little tricky to mount, but, yeah.
It's just loads of hot glue and blocks. You gotta like, you put wedges under things and you get it to the right
Yeah,
shape
right.
and then you cut the
Okay.
block to go there.
Okay. Okay.
It's process.
Yeah.
As long as you understand the process you're trying to do, wedges, I mean, they're a simple tool and they're brilliant. It's
Yeah.
doing so many things. So we're gonna just work on cleaning this up. Finish that out. You like the bead?
I like to be on that bowl.
You like the big fat bead?
I wish I could.
My queen bead, my fat bobby bead,
Outstanding.
makes the world go around. I'm just looking at the bevel of my tool in relation to where I'm gonna hold that tool handle. Because we want a nice shallow cut. It's almost like rubbing that bevel as you're going along.
Yeah.
That way you're getting that sheer cut that you're after. If you come at it like this, you're gonna just be tearing it all to pieces. You're gonna start chipping out your edges, all that kind of thing. So now that we're at a point where we gotta do that refined cut, I'm just checking this out and looking at it before I even turn that lathe on and making sure that I know where my hands are gonna be as I'm trying to get relaxed into this.
You do the same thing when you short.
Yeah. You know, it's all the same. Turning's all the same. Maybe one of those days where I should have just put it all the way down in the first place. Yeah. See what I'm seeing with the light reflecting off it right here? Trying to get into this corner in here. Here, cover the bowl guy does a nice job. And I often find a little undercut. Create some separation between bead and face. It's a subtle little detail that looks out pretty nice.
Is that how you help separate it when you burn the grain away? Putting a little undercut?
Yeah. And then by the time you wire brush all that burn, you just don't really notice the undercut anymore because it's lost in the char. But separating that also can help keep things like dye from
Right.
wicking.
Right.
Yes.
This might be heresy, but it's possible that you've got the backside of a piece as a front side flat, tapered down. Can you get a diameter for that? So this is the back, this is the front. Can you get the front tapered down? So it comes to the middle point of each end. So it has a little bit of a diameter to it, to mirror the opposite side.
You'd have to put it back between centers in this long axis in order to try and create any kind of curvature going that direction.
Clamp it on. Yeah, that's it. Chuck. Chuck on one.
The radian you would have here, you're gonna be turning on a radian like this big. Your diameter is gonna be that big, so your bowl is gonna have to have a big spacer in between in order to get that subtle round in that kind of pitch. It's doable. You just gotta figure out what diameters you wanna set there, that kind of thing. But I wouldn't bother, other than to get the bowl in it, I wouldn't bother doing any more on this shape then. I would put this bowl in it and then put them back together and put it back on the axis, the long axis to turn those in there. I just thought of that on the fly. How about that?
Work on that, report back.
Okay. You can sand these on the lathe. Of course, I'd want to just turn more. Got a little tearing going on here. But when I sand big stuff like this, I've got a 5-inch disc to put in the drill. So I've got a big, large surface area. And that's one of those where you got to be just really steady and approach. And you got to have that disc pitched ever so slightly. But what that does is it starts to round off those edges a little. So I will sand both directions with that slight pitch so that the corner of the sanding pad doesn't get caught on those faces. When you're doing things like sets of 3, like those wall hangings that are over there just laying flat on the table, you got a lot more surface area, and it's way easier to then just sand pretty much flat as you're sanding surfaces. But this would also be a thing where you could just sand it with your sander right there. You wouldn't have to spin it in order to sand those surfaces down. So, and then you can think about different textures, things you want to do. You can put little raised beads in places. There's, you know, tons and tons of stuff that you can do. So what else y'all want to see? Enough to chew on. No. Am I supposed to go to 8:30? Do I keep going? Were we supposed to clear out at 8:30 or?
Yeah.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it very much. Anybody gonna go home and try this?